Once you have a landing spot in SharePoint, usually in the form of a URL or a hyperlink that someone has provided you, navigating through the site is fairly straightforward. While it can likewise be simple to explain that all content in SharePoint resides in either a list or a library, the reality of finding that content, when it could be amongst thousands of pieces of data across multiple sites, is not quite so straightforward. In fact, we've mentioned a couple of times that looking for things on computer systems takes up an inordinate amount of our time, and that unfortunately, we usually don't find what we were looking for. Fortunately, SharePoint helps us in this area. We'll discuss some of the specific ways that we can help make our content more findable, but at this point, all we want to do is show you how to search for things, primarily how to search for people and content. It's important to know that SharePoint does have search capability built in. SharePoint uses a variety of things to find content. This includes titles, descriptions, keywords, the actual values of fields, something called metadata that we'll talk about when we discuss lists and libraries, and it even will search the actual content of files. We can even use some of our social networking things like tags or notes to help us find content. It really is an easy process by simply using the search box that can be found on most of your SharePoint pages, usually on the top right corner. In addition, just like an internet search, we can search very broadly or more narrow, using Search Everything or narrowing it down specifically to find people, conversations, or content limited to the current site, called this site. So we're going to assume that people are your colleagues or coworkers, and content is either files like Word, Excel, or PowerPoint, or maybe just plain old data like a contact record or a calendar item. To find these things, we really don't have to do anything. SharePoint is going to use all of its wonderful tools and the database that is SharePoint in the background in order to help us be able to search for the content that we want. All we have to do is tell SharePoint what it is we want to find. So let's go ahead and move out into our SharePoint site and do a couple quick searches to see how all of this really works. On a default SharePoint 2013 web page, the search box is going to be on the upper right-hand side, and it has the text in it that says, "Search this site." If it's not in this specific location, you should be able to look around and find it pretty easily because it looks like a search box, a big text box with a drop-down arrow and a magnifying glass. We are currently logged on as Michael Brooks. And let's say that Michael Brooks is curious to see if he is anywhere in SharePoint. So let's just start by typing Michael. We can then press Enter to launch the search. Although it doesn't usually happen on the internet, remember that this is just like an internet search. And sometimes we may put in a search criteria that doesn't result in anything that's found. In this case, it will be happy to tell us and give us some fairly generic suggestions on how to help. But I can provide some more options for you. The first is, let's make sure that we're looking in a wide enough area. The default is to search in this site. And this particular site really doesn't have a lot of content in it. So one option is to use the drop-down from the search and expand it. Or it may be that we even need to narrow it. But in this case, we're going to click or tap where it says Search Everything. That means everything in our entire SharePoint structure. Not just this website, but all of our SharePoint sites. And now you can see all kinds of information that we get. In fact, having no results for Michael is no longer our problem. There are a lot of results for Michael. Initially, as we start looking through these results, we may not understand why we have so many of these. But we have to remember that SharePoint is a full-blown search engine. So it's looking at a whole bunch of things when it searches. Titles, authors, meta tags, which are kind of invisible pieces of text that we never get to see, and even the content itself. If we look carefully at the search results, the search words will be bolded to help us see why the result was returned. So, as an example, we of course can see that Michael Brooks, his actual name of course, is part of our employee list. We also can see that this list was last updated on May 2nd of 2013, and we can even see the URL that tells us where this is located. It's actually in the team site, not in the You Got It training subsite. There's some other content that maybe we're not sure about, like why did an animal care manual get pulled up for an Andean condor? Why? Because one of the author's names in the article itself is Michael. So one of the pieces of advice I'd give you anytime you're looking at internet searches, even in SharePoint, is to slow down and take a look at the search results. There's usually a URL for the content it's describing, as well as a short description. Often the description is the first few words or so from the content itself. So taking a look at this will help you decide if this content really is the one you want before you go through the steps of opening each and every one. Of course, if you do click on one of the links, it's no big deal because this is a web browser. So if we open something up and then decide that's not where we want it to go, we can simply use our back button and it will return us back to our search results so we can try another one of our search results. By the way, another thing I wanted to mention is that generally SharePoint servers index content once a day, and it's usually in the middle of the night, so it doesn't slow down people trying to work on the system. Because of this, it could take up to 24 hours for new content to be indexed and show up as a search result. If your friend tells you that they just posted a document and you can't find it with a search, this is probably the reason why. Don't forget, the other reason could be that you don't have permissions to see their document. Two things to consider if trying to find content via a search. But content that is new or uploaded onto SharePoint is not immediately available for search results. It could take up to 24 hours. Okay, so we got lots of interesting things having all kinds of instances of the word Michael in it or associated with it somewhere, but this is not what we were looking for. We were looking for Michael Brooks, who is an employee, and we want to find Michael's profile without going through these potentially hundreds of other documents. What can we do? Well, instead of expanding our search, like we did initially, to everything, we might want to narrow the search and say we only want to find people. We could go back and use the drop-down from the search box once again, but we also have some categories right at the top of the screen that we can simply give a click or a tap to. We'll go ahead and click or tap on people. Michael is still our criteria, and now you can see that we have only one return, and that is the Michael Brooks profile. We're going to go ahead and give a click on this, and this is actually going to take us into Michael Brooks's profile or his My Site. We were able to find this very private place, even though it's available for public viewing, by using a simple SharePoint search and narrowing it down to people only, using the information that we were aware of. What you now know is that SharePoint does a fabulous job of helping you find content and people. The search box on most pages provides a simple way to search. You should try to be as specific as possible with your search terms, since SharePoint can contain thousands of documents and records. If possible, narrow the search by limiting it to the current site, to people, or to conversations instead of searching everything. Always be sure to review the search results themselves for locations, keywords, dates, and content to help you ensure it's the result you want before going through all of the trouble of opening it up. It can take up to 24 hours for new content on SharePoint to be indexed. So remember, if you're searching for something and you know it's there and you know you have permissions for it, it could be that you haven't given it enough time. If someone could send you the specific URL for that item, then you could access it, but it may not be available for up to 24 hours via the search. If you can't get to it even with the URL, then of course the reason is probably that you don't have permissions to see it, and that's something you'll have to take up with the list or site administrator. In short, being able to search for content in SharePoint is a huge time saver. It saves time, it saves frustration, and it's really one of the most powerful tools that we have that SharePoint gives us as an advantage over using good old file shares on the network.